Hello and welcome back. This is the third video in the Middle Arm Road ride, and I hope you're well. If you're watching, of course, obviously you are still with me. Thank you for returning. If you haven't watched the other videos, then by all means go back and watch them and get the full journey. But thank you for returning. At the end of the last video, I was so busy talking about lawn equipment, garden equipment and lawn mowers and things like that, and renewable energy and emissions and all that sort of stuff. I forgot to tell you when we came to the end of Middle Arm Road and then joined Woodhousley Road, that was at a little settlement or locality called Roslyn, where there was a church and a bushfire brigade building next to that, and across the road was a house. So there's really nothing at Roslyn other than just a sign that says Roslyn, so there's a sense of a particular location or something, and those three things. But Middle Arm Road came to an end there and joined Woodhousley Road, and now I'm on the Woodhousley Road, which will eventually join the Crookwell Road and then take me either to Crookwell or back towards Goulburn. I'll actually be going back towards Goulburn. You'll probably see that intersection coming up fairly shortly in the video, where I'll be making a left turn back towards Goulburn. Now, Woodhousley itself isn't actually a place either. It's a sort of locality where there's one of those signs that says Woodhousley, so people know where they are. And I guess that helps with things like the emergency services, the SES, when they need to be called out of the bushfire brigade or the police or whatever. And perhaps if you need roadside service with your car, they can help to locate you by using those signs or asking you, did you see one of those signs or something like that. But as I said, there's no actual settlement. There's no thing that you can say it's a village like that. So having put all that in perspective, then let's continue with the journey. So we're on the Woodhousley Road, and as you can see, it's definitely a C-class road. There are no markings on the road. There are those white, I think they're plastic, maybe plasticized metal or something or other, guideposts sometimes on the sides of the road. There are no markings on the road, and there are no markings on the edges of the road either. So it's not a very well used road. Or not when I say well used, I mean there's not a lot of traffic users. And as you've seen in these videos, there haven't been a lot of cars going either the opposite direction to me or even in the same direction as me so far. So you can understand why it is a C-class road, and why, having said all that, I don't think it's in terribly bad condition. I think it's in pretty good condition. You can see by the film that the bike's not jumping around, the camera's not jumping around, the suspension's not bouncing around all over the road or up and down as if there were potholes in the road or anything like that. So it's in pretty good condition for, I guess, what you'd call as a country road. As I said in the last video, I was talking about carbon emissions from lawn equipment and so on. I made that video and made the audio for that video on a Saturday and uploaded it that night. And then the next morning or the next day, I got out my electric lawnmower and mowed my grass, and got out my battery operated hedge trimmer and trimmed all my bushes and shrubs. But I left my electrically operated whippersnipper in the shed because I didn't need that. Now I haven't got much yard. I haven't got a very big front or backyard, so it didn't take very long to mow my lawns, even allowing for the nature strip out the front. And I tell myself that because I have solar panels and the sun was shining, the electricity I use to power my mower and to charge the battery in my hedge trimmer comes from the solar panels. I'm not sure if that's the case or not, but that's what I did. And I also thought it was somewhat ironic of me to be talking about carbon emissions from garden tools whilst riding a motorcycle. But again, I'd like to think that whilst my motorcycle isn't necessarily non-polluting because it's an internal combustion engine, it is, I'd like to think it's reasonably clean running. It's kept in pretty good condition. It's an engine that's about 10 years old now and has, but it's always serviced well, and it uses high octane fuel. So I'd like to think it's a pretty clean running engine. I thought what I would do today while I was riding is talk a little bit about professional sport. And the reason I want to talk about that is to do with the NRL, or National Rugby League. So if you live in Australia, you'll be aware that there are 4 codes of football. That is soccer, or what the rest of the world calls football, Australian rules football, rugby league, and then rugby. The NRL is the National Rugby League competition, which is mostly played in the eastern states, that is Queensland, New South Wales, and there is a team in Melbourne as well, but mostly the teams are concentrated in New South Wales and Queensland. Last year, when the COVID outbreak was at its highest point, or it's at a serious point, the competition in the NRL, as in all sports, was suspended. And I thought that was the wise thing and the proper thing to do. And then when the competition restarted, I think about the 28th of May, I initially thought, well, this is a bit premature. They're sort of going back to work when they're still going back to playing sport, when we're still serious concerns about the spread of this disease and so on. We were told that the people in charge of the NRL had consulted all sorts of experts in epidemiology and spread of viruses and so on, and taken all precautions, and we're going to set all these bubbles up and all that sort of stuff. And apparently they did all of that, and I watched the rest of that season and watched the games and took an interest. I should, I suppose at this point, confess that I'm a St George supporter. And although we didn't do particularly well last year, that didn't seem to matter as much. I was sort of watching the games and enjoying the games. And then the competition started again this year, and I followed the games, and I even went to a game for the first time in a couple of years. And then there was the weekend when the Dragons had a bye, or I forget the exact details of the story, but they were specifically told that they were not to gather together, they were not to go to somebody's place and celebrate a victory they were just had or were about to have, or something like that. And in complete contravention of those instructions and contravention of all the rules and regulations that covered COVID at the time, a bunch of these blokes got together and had a party. As a result, one bloke had his contract torn up immediately, and I believe something like $300,000 in fines were handed out to various players as a consequence of that. And at that point I decided I would no longer watch the NRL that season. For the rest of the season. And for the rest of the season, I did not watch a single game. I didn't even watch the grand final. I didn't read any newspaper articles. I didn't take any interest in anything that came up on my Facebook or any of those other sorts of feeds. I decided that I was going to boycott sport, and boycott the NRL in particular, for the rest of the season. My reason for doing that was this. At a time when everybody else was struggling with working from home, stay at home, quarantine. Some people were on half pay, some people were on JobKeeper or whatever it was called. All sorts of people who follow football and who go to football and watch football games were doing it really tough. Financially, some people were in really difficult circumstances, and these guys who were earning 6 and in some cases 7-figure salaries were allowed to go back to work and continue to earn their big salaries and play their game, providing they followed a few simple rules, but they seemed to be either unable or unwilling to follow those rules. Now, I acknowledge that what I'm saying, that what I just said there, and the fact that I decided to make this boycott doesn't necessarily apply to every single player, but it just seemed that there were seemed to be lots of stories throughout the season of people breaking the various rules that are around COVID isolation or COVID quarantines or whatever. It seemed to me that the players were, or at least the players in this particular circumstance, were either unaware of or ignorant of the difficulties that other people were facing. Now, having said that, I acknowledge that the New Zealand Warriors, for example, had spent 2 years in Australia away from their families. The Melbourne Storm players had moved to Queensland and spent almost 2 years away from home, and in some cases away from their families, so they could continue to play the game. So they must have had some idea of the difficulties that other people were experiencing. I acknowledge that some players were well and truly appreciative of the difficulties that COVID was bringing to ordinary families, but it just seemed to me that there was this large group of players who either were unable or unwilling to abide by a few simple rules. I'm just interrupting here for a moment. We're about to turn off the Woodhousley Road onto the Crookwell Road, going left back towards Goulburn here. and you can see the road is much better made. There are markings down the centre of the road. There are markings on either side, making it, I'd say, possibly, maybe even it's a C-class road or possibly a B-class road, but it's a better road in terms of how it looks than the one we just came off. So going back to these guys playing football and so on, a couple of years back I read there was a situation regarding the Melbourne Storm where the coach, Craig Bellamy, had said to the players in the off-season, you all need to go and get a job. And they kind of looked at him and thought, what do we need a job for? What if it's the off-season? We don't work, we don't do anything, we have time off. And he explained to them, you need to go and get a job because you need to experience and you need to understand what it is that the people who come to your games, buy the jumpers, buy the other bits and pieces of memorabilia, pay for the tickets, all the things that allow you to earn the salary you earn. You need to go and get a job to understand that a bloke who's on $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year or whatever it is, what he is doing, or she for that matter, is doing in order to be able to come to a football game on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, whatever it is, and you need to appreciate what it is that they do in order that you can earn the salary that you earn. And up until that point, and up until recently, in fact, I think this season, the Melbourne Storm have been a club that has generally been free of most controversies and conflicts. I understand there was some drama with some magic white powder this year, and although I didn't read any of the articles about it, so I don't know any of the story, it's hard to escape the headlines of these things. And as I say, I don't know the details. But I know that one of the players involved in that particular situation had problems with alcohol problems before and had been sent to rehab, and I believe he's been sent off to rehab again. So I think that my point I'm trying to make here is that playing professional sport, and especially rugby league, it's a brutal sport, it's a hard sport. You don't have a long career in it, and when your career is over, whether it lasts a couple of years or 5 years or 10 years or 20 years or whatever it is that someone like Cameron Smith had played for, that you're probably not going to be much good for many other things. You're probably going to not have a lot of skills in any other area. Maybe you can get a job as a coach or a trainer or an assistant coach, one of those things. If you're good enough and photogenic enough and all that sort of stuff, you might score a job in the media. But if you think of the team that's on Fox Sports, for example, I can't comment so much on the Channel 9 team of late, but the team that's been on Fox, there's been a bit of a revolving door in the last few years of players ex-players who've been commentators 1 year and a couple of years, and then you don't see them again. I think of a couple that come to my mind. Brett Camorley was on there for a little while, and you don't see him any longer. Mark Gasnier, who was on there for a couple of years and then didn't have his contract renewed. And I think there was a similar situation with the cricket this year, that one of the commentators said a few things that somebody didn't like, and so he's not had his contract renewed either. So if you don't score a job in the media and you don't score a job carrying the water or whatever it is that you do in one of those sort of assistant jobs in rugby league, you're probably not good for a lot of other things after you retire. So I understand the players' right to earn as much money as they can while they can, but I think that I just got the feeling this year that there were players who just did not appreciate what it was that they were being allowed to do, while other people were not being allowed to do what they do. In other words, these guys were being allowed to go and play their sport, earn their income, as I say, sometimes 6 and 7 figure salaries, while other people were on either half income or JobKeeper or whatever it's called, working from home, hours reduced, all those sorts of things. These guys are playing football, and then they've been given a few simple instructions about this is what you're supposed to do. At the end of the game, you've got to do this. During the week, you're not allowed to mix with these people, you're not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do that. I realise that those things are hard, but they're hard for everybody else as well. So as I say, I decided to stop following football for the rest of this season, and I'm not sure if I'll ever pick it up and follow it again. I watched a thing on YouTube a little while ago from PBS, which is the public broadcasting system in America, so it's the equivalent of the ABC but much smaller, and they made a program about what the NFL, the National Football League, knew about the connection between concussion, brain injury and dementia and other long-term brain problems that players in the NFL had. And it was really quite shocking to watch that program and realise what the players were doing. Now, I acknowledge to start off with that NFL is an entirely different game from NRL. Nevertheless, both of these games are games where players can suffer repeated head injury, and I know there are protocols in the NRL now about head injury assessments and things like that, and players are supposed to be stood down. But there's a fellow, again, I didn't read the articles, but there's a fellow who was in the news this year for having sued or wanting to sue the Newcastle Knights, saying that he was almost forced to go back on the field by the coaches and coaching staff because they needed him out there when he'd been concussed. He was now experiencing signs of dementia, and I don't know if he lost the case or what happened, but he ended up with nothing. And so, it just seems to me that this is a particularly brutal sport, and I don't know if I can go back to watching it or not. So that's my piece on professional sport. We're coming along the Crookwell Road back towards Goulburn now, and I'm not exactly sure how far it is to Goulburn. I know that this video is close to coming to the end, so again I'll say thank you for watching and listening to me. If you have an opinion on anything that I've said in this video, by all means feel free to offer your feedback. Otherwise, I'll say goodbye and thank you for watching, and I will talk to you when I'm preparing the next video, which will be the final clip in this strip. So thank you for watching.